All right. Hello, bonjour, and guten tag. My name is Paul Rosen, the Executive Chairman of Global Go. I'm so delighted to begin our second webinar focusing on Switzerland. Global Go continues to explore leadership in some of the emerging cannabis jurisdictions around the world as we continue to watch, encourage, and champion the green revolution sweeping the globe. That green revolution is the introduction of sensible adult use and medical cannabis programs. We have a expression, those of us in the industry that talk about cannabis years, kind of like dog years, meaning that they move very quickly. And Switzerland is a great example at the alacrity and the speed in which this industry is developing. We had our first webinar featuring the emerging cannabis jurisdiction of Switzerland way back in, are you ready? November 2020. So hardly, just a number of months ago. And even since that period of time, there's been significant and even, I would say, profound existential development. So just a quick summary on Switzerland. Everyone knows it's the heart of Central Europe. It has a population of about 8.5 million people, and it's estimated about 200,000 Swiss citizens are regular cannabis users. And Switzerland began with a low THC program in 2011 that allowed cannabis products with no more than 1% THC, which we might just not call cannabis per se, but more call like CBD, was legalized in the country. But really, let's just fast forward. In September 2020, the Swiss State Council approved a proposal for a pilot project for the distribution of recreational cannabis in the country. And so far, since that announcement, the municipalities of Basel, Bern, Biel, Geneva, and Zurich have already expressed their interest in participating in the pilot project. And just a few days ago, on March 31st, a draft of the regulation was released with further details divulged, meaning that in a short 5 weeks from now, on or about May 15th, Switzerland will begin this brave new era in its march towards adult use sensible cannabis reform and allow pilot adult use recreational projects, which will make Switzerland, alongside the Netherlands, as the only regions in Europe to have a fully legalized adult use supply. So that this is historic and meaningful, and I will say is a strong indication as to what is going to happen on the rest of the continent, probably sooner rather than later. We've seen that when one jurisdiction begins a sensible path, it tends to put pressure on other jurisdictions. Look at Canada, now Mexico, no doubt going to put pressure on the United States. Additionally, getting a prescription for medical cannabis has gotten or will get a little bit easier for Swiss patients in 2022. Just a few days ago, Switzerland Upper Chamber of Government, the Council of States, unanimously approved a proposal that was passed by the Swiss National Council last December to allow doctors in the country to prescribe medical cannabis without federal authorization. This is anticipated to, if you will, launch in 2022. So we are now going to address all of these exciting developments with some of the thought leaders and market participants in Switzerland. Just before we get to our agenda, in lieu of a webinar registration fee, we're encouraging all of our attendees today to consider making a donation of up to $100 or more if you're feeling spirited to MedCan, Switzerland's Medical Cannabis Association, which was founded in 2014 with the aim of giving medical cannabis patients a base to connect with each other and a voice to exert political and social pressure. So if you're happy with and finding today's content useful and informative, which I sure hope after I stop speaking you will, please consider a little bit of a donation to help the momentum towards reform. Without further ado, let's get to our program. I'm so delighted to introduce today's keynote speaker, Mr. Lino Cereghetti, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Pure Holding AG. For those of you that don't know, Pure Holding AG, I would say, is quickly becoming a very recognized and respected and scalable cannabis entity covering the entire value chain of the industry with 6 different entities: Pure Production, DOEOM, Pure Gene, Pure Pharma, and Pure Europe. Lino is the Chief Operating Officer and part of the executive team at Pure Holding, and he's also a board member in the industry association, IG Hemp, where he's heading regulatory affairs. Lino holds a bachelor in biology from ETH Zurich and is working or has achieved his master in agricultural economics. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so delighted to introduce you to Lino Cereghetti.
Thanks for the short introduction and the opportunity to speak here, Paul. It is a great pleasure for me to be able to tell the world about the developments in Swiss cannabis policies today. It's hard to believe how fast progressive cannabis regulation is picking up speed here in Switzerland, but it also fills me with pride that Switzerland is finally also taking on a pioneering role in the global cannabis industry. As an introduction to the panel session, I will try to introduce you to the most current topic in the Swiss cannabis policies, the pilot projects. I'll try to share my screens to show you some slides. I hope this works. Otherwise, please let me know. Do you see the slides? Yes, I guess so. So what is it all about? In brief, the goal of the pilot projects is to gain knowledge and scientific insights about the effects of a regulated recreational cannabis market in Switzerland through a special study setting. The pilot project should further provide insights into the effects on the physical and mental health of consumers and their performance on socioeconomic issues. They should also provide insights on the effect on the black market, prevention, public order, and safety. Everyone knows about Switzerland's much praised democratic system, but no one is aware of how complicated it actually is. In order not to deprive you of the illusion of a perfect democracy, I will not go into the political process in depth. However, I would like to highlight a few things. There are different ways how political processes in Switzerland get rolling. A rather rare but effective way is a Federal Council dispatch. Here, the Federal Council gives a direct mandate to the Parliament to introduce legislation. This was also the case with the pilot projects and clearly underlines the interest of the highest authority to quickly achieve progressive cannabis regulation in Switzerland. All the more astonishing is the pace of cannabis policy making, especially while the involved bodies, the Parliament's Social Security and Health Committees and the Federal Office of Public Health, simultaneously had to deal with a lot of COVID-related issues. In Switzerland, we have two parliamentary chambers, the National Council with 200 seats and the Council of States with 46 seats. In both councils, expert committees made up of council members first deal with issues in detail before the entire council votes on them. In the legislative process, the two chambers disagreed on the article organic production, but finally found a compromise, organic if possible in record time, what might now lead to complications in the implementation though. After passing through Parliament, the Federal Office for Public Health began drafting the ordinance, which was published on the 31st of March 2021 and will become legally binding on the 15th of May 2021. From then on, pilot projects can be set up in Switzerland within a time window of 10 years until the 14th of May 2031. Below the timeline, you can see how Pure has closely followed and scientifically accompanied this process. But first, let's talk about the setup and regulatory framework of the pilot projects. The ordinance is rather kept broad and open, but still includes many restrictions, some of which I will try to summarize through this slide. The studies have to be geographically limited to municipalities and are approved for a maximum time span of 5 years, with a one-time expansion for a maximum of 2 years. The number of participants per pilot project must not exceed 5,000 participants. All of the participants must be older than 18, and they must be able to prove prior cannabis consumption through, for example, hair samples. They must be residential in the canton in which the pilot project is carried out, and all the participants' health effects must be monitored throughout the whole study. The cultivation of recreational cannabis in Switzerland is only allowed with an exemption permit by the Federal Office for Public Health and is only given to producers involved in one of the pilot projects. If possible, all the cannabis cultivated for the pilot projects must be of Swiss origin and must be produced in accordance with GACP and the provision of the Organic Farming Ordinance from 1997. Since there is no restriction on product type, the studies could include cannabis products like flowers, edibles, tinctures, hash, dab, shatter, wax, e-liquids, and many more. Nevertheless, health risk minimizing forms of consumption should be included in the studies. The cannabis made available within the framework of the pilot projects must require certain quality requirements. For example, a maximum threshold for the total THC content of 20%, a maximum threshold for orally administered products for 10 milligram per serving, and furthermore, cannabis products must not contain contaminants at a level harmful to health, in particular microbial contaminants, mycotoxins, heavy metals, pesticides, and solvents from extraction. With regard to the distribution system, the authorities have deliberately left the framework open in order to be able to compare different distribution systems. The aim is to compare the effects on consumption of distribution in pharmacies, specialized cannabis shops, or in the context of so-called cannabis social clubs, where cannabis social clubs are private and non-profit based consumer associations. Regarding the delivery limit, each participant may only obtain products with a total content of a maximum of 10 grams of pure THC per month. No more than 10 grams of an unmixed cannabis product may be dispensed at once, and for edibles, the maximum dispensing amount is 2 grams of total THC per purchase. Cannabis products sold to participants in the pilot projects must be compliant to black market prices, meaning 10 to 15 Swiss francs a gram. The ordinance published by the Federal Office for Public Health demonstrates the competence and expertise of the authorities team in cannabis matters. They have deliberately left the study framework for the pilot projects very open in order not to limit the possibilities of the study design and thus arrive at a wide variety of insights. However, the responsibility for implementation now lies with the individual study organizers, such as the cities of Zurich, Bern, Basel, Lausanne, Geneva, St. Gallen, and others. The Pure Group has already worked with 4 THC exemption permits by the Federal Office for Public Health and Swissmedic in recent years. Among them, an exemption permit for Pure Gene to carry out research and development with over 50 different high THC varieties on the Pure campus. Therefore, Pure Gene has the largest THC R&D permit in Europe, which allows the group to work with an extensive gene pool. Furthermore, we own an exemption permit to perform analytics with THC, and one that allows us to import THC seeds from all over the world into Switzerland by Swissmedic. The most exciting one for today, though, is the exemption permit for field trials by Pure Production to test varieties within the scope of the pilot projects, which are optimally suited for the local environmental and organical growing conditions. This special permit allowed us to gather valuable experience in the cultivation of organic THC in Switzerland in the scope of the pilot projects, to contribute to progressive Swiss cannabis policies, and to conduct the world's largest trade discovery trial on cannabis. In 2020, we had 25,000 plants on the field, 5,000 thereof THC plants. This allowed us to research 6,000 different cannabis genotypes and led to the identification of over 100 quantifiable traits. As the Swiss market leader, Pure regards the pilot projects as a nationwide contribution to the regulation of the Swiss cannabis market and an opportunity for Switzerland to further pioneer the European cannabis industry. So how does Pure contribute to the pilot projects? In 2021, we will be again conducting stage 2 of our huge THC field trials in the scope of the pilot projects. This will allow us to gain further insights that will be incorporated into the pilot projects. Our incredibly large genetics library allows us to offer a wide range of field-tested THC varieties as organic clones, and thanks to our technology platform for molecular plant breeding, we could even breed tailor-made varieties for the pilot projects. Since we have acquired the permits, the THC varieties, the organic production site, necessary safety infrastructure for our scientific research anyway, we can easily integrate the THC needs of the pilot projects into our trial growth. Regarding quality, Pure is the first Swiss producer to receive the Swiss Certified Cannabis Certificate, and in addition, our operation also meets the standard of ISO 9001 and GACP. As the market leader in the Swiss cannabis industry and the global pioneer in cannabis research, we have offered our experience and expertise to the interested organizations and cities to assist them in the planning and implementation of their pilot projects. I hope that I was able to give you a brief introduction on the cannabis pilot projects and Pure today. Nevertheless, I would like to use my last minute to give you an outlook on further developments in Swiss cannabis policies. On the 8th of March 2021, medical cannabis passed both parliamentary chambers. Together, the Federal Office for Public Health and Swissmedic will draft the ordinance that is expected to come into effect next year. Meaning from 2022 on, Switzerland will have a legal medical THC cultivation for the domestic market, as well as for export to medical markets abroad. On the 18th of March 2021, a postulate on a better regulatory framework for the Swiss hemp and cannabis industry was submitted to the Federal Council. The Federal Council is now mandated to examine and represent in a report how the various forms of cannabis could be made more economically usable and how a contemporary and comprehensive cannabis regulation could be enacted. The response by the Federal Council on this postulate is expected by May 2021. On the 28th of April 2021, so this month, a parliamentary initiative will be discussed in the Social Security and Health Committee of the National Council. The aim is a new cannabis law and the complete regulation of recreational and medical cannabis in Switzerland. So stay tuned, because I'm sure you will hear more great news from Little Switzerland very soon. Thank you all for your attention. Happy to answer all your questions in the Q&A session. Back to you, Paul.
Great. That was so informative, Lino. What an incredible company that you've been playing a leadership role, and very excited to continue to track your evolution. And it looks like you're in pole position as Switzerland begins to architect a path towards full adult use recreational cannabis. All right, let's get to our panel, because we have a lot of other real thought leaders and market participants that I think will further sort of unpack what is the opportunity in Switzerland, and certainly for those of us who are not in Switzerland, what might be the opportunities for us to identify or participate in. I can't think of anybody more equipped and qualified to be our moderator today than my friend and colleague, Alfredo Pascual. Anyone that's been paying even remote attention to this industry already knows Alfredo as one of the most respected, authoritative, and I would say prolific commentators in our industry across multiple mediums, most recently as a key journalist and editorialist at Marijuana Business Daily, where he had a byline for years. But aside from that, Alfredo has been identifying opportunities and generating insights for businesses and investors in the legal cannabis sector. And he's really focused on Europe and in Latin America, which is very consistent with a lot of the strategies of Global Go. Is these are the markets that we're looking to participate in because we see that they're likely going to have huge growth trajectories, not unlike what's happened in more mature jurisdictions like, for example, Canada and the United States. So let's throw it over to Alfredo. Alfredo, welcome, and we're looking forward to hearing your insights, and we're looking forward to this panel.
Thank you, Paul. Very kind introduction. Let's see if we have the panelists here. So Lino is staying. Lino, are you around? Okay, there's Michael there, Dr. Michael Ruckel, Director of Plant Science at PureGene AG. Michael, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Awesome, thank you. I also see Luke Richner, founder and CEO of Vigia.
Hi, Alfredo. Yes, pleasure to be here.
Hi, Luke. And Andrew also joined us. Andrew Petonanos, founder at FineLeaf and also consultant at Global Go Switzerland.
Hey, Alfredo. Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
Thank you all for joining. I don't know if Lino is also staying for the panel, but he may join
in. Alfredo, so now I can turn on my video. I think Richard will help me in a sec. Yes, great.
Good to have you back, Lino. All right. We have a dream team here to answer all the questions about Switzerland. So let's start. And by the way, Lino, thank you for the great introduction to the framework, let's say. A key date is May 15th. Correct me if I am wrong, but if I understood correctly, the recently approved rules become legally binding on May 15th. that sounds great. But the question, I guess, is what does that really mean for businesses? I mean, what can companies do on May 15? Can they go apply for a, I don't know, cultivation license, distribution license, or whatever? Or is there more? Is there something else that needs to be done from the government level? It could be a regional government or the central government for opportunities to actually be available for companies. So let's start with that. What changes on May 15 and what's still missing for production to begin?
So as you stated correctly, on May 15th, the Narcotics Act will be amended and the amendments coming into force and the application process for pilot projects open, meaning that organizations and cities can submit their application for their studies to the Federal Office for Public Health. In theory, the first pilot projects could even start in 2021, because if a organizer like a city would already be ready, submit the application on May 15th, which would be pretty super fast, and the Federal Office for Public Health also replies to that application super fast, studies are able to start in 2021 from the 15th of May on. But in my opinion, a more realistic timeline is for pilot projects to start maybe mid next year. But since the responsibility for the implementation lies with the individual project organizers, they won't all start at the same time. So some might be faster, others might be slower. For companies and production, they can also start applying for special permits, but you don't do it as a company, you do it together with a pilot project. So you will only get a special permit to produce THC in Switzerland if you tag along to one of the pilot projects that selected you as their cultivator.
And is that also, sorry to jump in, but I think it's,
go ahead.
I think Lino will be able to cover most of the stuff, and a great presentation. I think it's awesome to see really what's going on and from you guys. Is it correct also, Lino, that from now on, so a city decides on the pilot projects, then you have to figure out the points of sale, which will be a separate company or an institution, and then that institution chooses the cannabis producer that basically will have their cannabis there that will be given out to the pilot consumers.
Yeah, you're like, I can't fully tell you, or fully not 100% sure, let's say, because it's only drafted in the ordinance, and how it plays out in the end depends on the cities as well. But let's say, well, from what I have heard or what I have experienced in discussions with cities, a lot will be down to self-responsibilities. So as you said, the different distribution system, be it pharmacies or social clubs, they decide themselves where they are gonna get their material. But so not within a pilot project, not every pharmacy has to have the same product from the same producers, but it's only a certain amount of producers they can actually choose from, only the ones that were able to partner with the pilot project and receive these special permits. Because otherwise, or what the Federal Office for Public Health can't do, is just hand out permits, everybody starts producing, the pilot projects buy what they need, and in the end we have a lot of leftover of this THC material in Switzerland that then again needs to be destroyed. Therefore, they try to figure out how big is the demand, how many producers do we need, who is going to produce what material, what kind of products can they offer, what kind of standards can they offer, is it organic or not? These are all factors playing into the decision.
I think it's also, thank you very much, Lino, for your keynote. Always a pleasure. I think it's also very important to keep in mind it's a scientific study. So you have to consider the whole loop, the whole closed circle. It's not just who produces, it's who consumes, how does it get there, how does it not go into the black market, how does it stay within the system, how do you have compliance issues in place, how much do you produce, how many people will consume. So it's a socio-cultural study that has to be addressed on all different levels of the supply chain. So it's just...
And who is going to determine all those rules? Is it going to be the cantons, and they could have different rules in different cantons? For example, distribution, let's say. Who is going to determine how distribution will be done?
It's a scientific study, so it's up to the it's up to the people who hand in the studies to determine what different possibilities are there. So you can, or that's how I understand it. Lino, correct me if I'm wrong. It's for everybody to hand in something that is, be creative. Like there is social clubs, there is coffee shops, there is pharmacies.
Okay,
there
so
is, I'm not saying any of them will be accepted, but theoretically, everything is possible. But it has to be thought through on all different aspects.
So speculating here, just on a hypothetical scenario, it could be that Zurich, for example, does the experiment with, let's say, social clubs, and then St. Gallen decides to do an experiment, but only with pharmacies, for example. That could happen in parallel, right? Because it's two different experiments, two different pilot schemes, right?
This is feasible. Yeah, Luc was completely right. So the Federal Office for Public Health drafted a dreamlike legal framework, and now
But it's very open, right?
Very open, and now the study organizers can design their own pilot project within this framework. And yeah, unfortunately, it's no longer under the influence of the Federal Office for Public Health, how they use that framework and play it out into effect. Yeah. The responsibility for planning and implementing the pilot project lies with the individual license holders and corresponds a bit to the federal structure of Switzerland. So as you asked as well, it could be fairly well that St. Gallen does a completely different trial than Zurich does. That's also something they are aiming for, to get different insights about different research questions. It makes no sense that every city conducts the same experiment because you end up with the same results.
So there are some very basic requirements. For example, we will talk about it later, like the organic cultivation and microbiology requirements, for example, of the products, THC caps. But then when it comes to the specifics of how it's going to work, recapping here, it will be up to the different cantons, and then we can see different models working in Switzerland.
And I think it's not only the cantons, it's the organizer within the cantons that chooses to do whatever.
I think it's interesting to understand also how Switzerland is structured. Like you have a little bit like the States, you have that federal government, and the federal government basically said, come up with ideas, bring us suggestions. How could this look like? So, and they, as you know, they created a framework that is very, very open, and therefore actually a very nice basis to be creative in different kind of pilot projects or scientific studies in the end of the day, from A to Z. But then it comes down to canton and communes to implement that and to see if this is something that works for this or not. Mountain cantons are different than city cantons in Switzerland. So there's a lot of different things to also consider there, right? Some are very close in, some are very widespread. So yeah.
It could also happen that a canton says we don't want to have anything to do with this, right? And they don't participate in the experiment, which...
Yeah, and what's interesting there is also that everybody that registers, if you want to have access to the pilot program, not as a business, now as an individual, you have to prove that you're a resident in that canton. But what's interesting on what Luc's comment was, if you compare it to the US, yes, you have to show that you're a resident, but the cannabis doesn't have to come from a specific canton, right? It's not like the MSO side where actually if the organizer of Canton Zug, let's say, or Zurich has a pilot program there, the cannabis can come from Aargau or another canton. So that's...
Got it. And speaking about cantons, so we do know already that some of these cantons have already expressed interest, at least that they do want to participate. And I think the good news here is that unlike in the case of the Netherlands, where there's also an ongoing starting experiment with recreational cannabis, so in the Netherlands, the municipalities that are participating are all quite small. So it's not Amsterdam or Rotterdam, for example. But it looks like in Switzerland, we may be lucky, and actually the largest cities will participate, right?
All the major ones are in, yes.
Yeah, I think so far, and maybe Lino and Luc, you might know more, but the 5 major cantons looks like they're going to participate. So the 5 major cities, you'll be able to get, registering participants for the pilot program.
And here's a doubt that I have about that, because I read the 5,000 people limit per experiment or per pilot scheme. My question is, does that apply to the canton, or could a canton have, I don't know, 10 different experiments, and then it would be 10 times 5,000 people, the maximum allowed?
So if I can quickly clarify, what I have also just realized with the ordinance coming out on the 31st of May is that basically these pilot projects are open for public organizations, institutions, as well as private ones. We have always been talking in Switzerland about cities doing these studies because the cities have committed to this quite early, but it's not limited to cities. The big cities that are already setting up or in the, let's say, in the planning of the studies are Zurich, Bern, Basel, Lausanne, Geneva, and St. Gallen, but also minor cities are planning to participate. They are a little further behind in the whole planning process and might also follow and align with the studies of the bigger cities. In my opinion, it would be possible for a city like Zurich to conduct 2 pilot projects with each of them having 5,000 participants. But currently, so when we were talking about the pilot projects a year ago, we were expecting 50,000 people upwards participating in these projects. We were thinking that everybody in Switzerland can get recreational THC more or less. But now with the burden of financing, so the federal government is not allowed to contribute financially to the pilot projects. So the costs need to be covered by the individual cities, for example, or organizers, let's say, which some of them are cities. Therefore, I rather expect smaller participant numbers, and I think it would be great already or a success if we get more than 5,000 or let's say between 5,000 and 10,000 participants.
Got it.
And many small ones, I think, will be interesting to see many different small ones that kind of are fragmented into the different ways of how that circular economy could look like.
Because like Lino, you mentioned, I mean, funding wise, it's not funded by the government, it's funded by the communes, university, foundation, association, whoever is going to be conducting the study. But that funding, if I understand correctly, provides just for the setup of the infrastructure and traceability, tracking, everything of that will be covered by whoever is arranging, but then actually the cannabis will be paid by the individuals who are purchasing it.
Got it. And then the central government will need to approve these different projects, right? So a dossier, I don't know, let's say the city will send a dossier to the federal government, and then it's going to be the federal government that's going to say, yeah, this looks like a legitimate experiment, go ahead with it. Is that the way that it will work? And
yeah,
that's what can happen in many 15s, right?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think, you know, we can only find out how things will proceed when, you know, when people do file in their dossiers. And, you know, like Lino said, we might have a very nice democratic system and looks very efficient in Swiss ways, but actually, like any political system, decision making is one thing, implementation is another thing, and then it's, you know, it's a cycle. And I think that's where also your timeline of 5 years plus 2, I think we will probably see an extension of the program happening anyway. So yeah, I mean.
Got it. So let's talk. So we said that the rules are quite open, but there are some rules, including, for example, THC caps, and particularly original, I would say, is the organic requirement. And maybe let's give Michael an opportunity to speak about the requirements here. I would say my first reaction is why? What justifies this type of requirements in a way?
I think the organic requirement actually puts let's say a bit of honesty label onto the industry to make sure that everything is being produced under a set of guideline that's already been established, right? Instead of reestablishing all of the rules, let's just put it on the back of the organic production process. For cannabis,
you say it's a way of giving it more legitimacy?
In a way, it's also a form of legitimacy, but these are also laws and rules that are set by another set by a different set of let's say members around the world, and also within Switzerland, that have defined these rules on what organic production means. And I think that within that, then it already has that, let's say, branding, that people know what to expect when they get the cannabis that has the organic label on it. And that, I think that's the more that mentality in terms of production practices, specifically for cannabis. There's still a lot of open questions, but one of the kind of the things that most people don't think about, particularly if you're looking at cannabis flowers, one of the worst things that you can have in your flower is a seed. Seeds are kind of a normal process that you have within cannabis reproduction, but in the industry, this is coming from a process of sex reversal to produce a female plant that produces only female offspring. And this process is not allowed under the organic.
I was gonna ask, can that be organic?
Rules. So this will restrict production only to clones. And as you mentioned, there's also the restriction on the 20%. This is it's a plant, and it's nature, and controlling nature is not always easy. One plant that produces 20 or let's say 15% this year, if you have a hot year, let's say next year, then it's going to end up, maybe the plant will end up producing more THC. And I think these things also need to kind of be thought of. It's when you're growing outdoors, it's a biological system, and that you can't say we are going to have a plant that produces only or exactly 15%. It's like,
but there's a tolerance there. If I remember in the rules, I think it's 25% range that you can deviate from the label when it comes to the cannabinoid level. So that's, I would say, somewhat generous compared with the medicinal market in Germany, for example, where it's only 10%. It looks like it gives more room there for variability.
And I think in indoor production, it's a lot easier to control. A lot easier to control. I mean, this is also running over clones. One of the things that we breed for in our breeding program is that stability. So when you have when you have that label, there are some certain genetics that always push exactly the amount that you want. Other genetics will be all over the place, really much more dependent on the environment. And all of these kind of fit together at the level of the importance of what the genetics are. And I think one of the things that we will offer to the community is really a report on what had happened last year in 2020, as well as the repeat of this experiment this year, to test how stable the plants are year in and year out.
So question for everyone, what other challenges do you see with the organic requirement? And one that I can think of, and you let me know if I'm wrong, is complying with the microbiology required of the product, the contamination levels, right? So when it comes to for example, bacteria. So in some medical markets in Europe, it is normal to irradiate the product, gamma irradiation, to reduce the contamination levels, and with that comply with the requirements. I can assume that if organic production is required, then gamma irradiation to decrease contamination is not going to be possible. So do you see a challenge there, that it will be complicated for companies growing outdoor to comply with the strict level of cleanliness required?
Well, I think, not to cover the scientific part, but you always have to think of the main purpose of the pilot programs, and that is, how can you compete with the black market, and can you create a pilot program that you can evaluate in some ways that the black market will decrease by you having this recreational market. So I know the ordinance brought out quite a few microbiological parts. I want to assume you want to meet it to as much as clean as possible on what's going to be delivered to the pilot program. I think it will be an issue, and scientifically, maybe Michael or Lino can speak.
I mean, if I can add to that, Mike already started explaining on how the organic clause came into this law. So when a legal framework is passing through the parliamentary chambers, they can add stuff. First, they added to the framework that the products have to be supplied from Switzerland, and then another party added the organic clause with the intention for clean, transparent production. But since these are politicians and not plant experts or agricultural experts, they weren't really sure on the implications of what does organic production in cannabis mean. So Mike explained the seeds are going to be a problem. Furthermore, indoor production is not going to be possible because of, or in the Swiss organic ordinance, you have to have soil-bound production, therefore you can't grow indoors.
What about pots? Can you grow in pots?
Not in pots.
No, it has to be soil-bound. So
directly in the soil.
And
you're looking at either outdoor production or at most a tunnel, because you have to use natural soil.
Greenhouse over organic soil.
That's going to be challenging.
Rare in Switzerland. And this is also a problem because what are consumers used to so far from the recreational or let's say black market? It's all indoor flower. So on the black market, you don't get any outdoor flower. So one of my fears is that the participants will be disappointed because they expect heavy, dense indoor flowers, whereas they get organically produced Swiss outdoor greenhouse flowers. And then in the end, go back to what they like and are used to, the illegal products, what would damage the studies. And we have been bringing up this point for a while, and the hands were of the, let's say, Federal Office for Public Health were tied because in the political process, they were ordered to come up with the legislation for organic. Wow. And that's what they had to do. But I think when bringing this up in the parliamentary chambers, the intention was to get good quality, clean material. And instead of just defining thresholds or anything, they just went with organic because what Mike said, this already existed. Everybody knows what it is. But this now has heavy implications on the whole production.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge, no doubt about it. Thank you for the explanations. And I think this is a good moment to now ask the next question that I had planned, which is, how will this be evaluated, right? So for example, Lino, you were mentioning there's a possibility that users go back to the black market because they are used to an indoor produced flower, for example. Therefore, it would mean that the experiment is failing, right? Or at least to a certain extent. So yeah, when I read the rules, I didn't find much about how this will be evaluated. How do we know if it was a success or not, and how it will that be used politically 5 years from now, let's say, by those who want full legalizations and those who oppose it?
Will it be failing if they go back, or will it prove that that framework was maybe
That's
not
correct.
the framework needed? That's the whole part of scientific study, right? The idea is to learn what will the consumer do, and if it means that everybody jumps back into the black market because there was no indoor flower, then that is something that has to be evaluated.
Something that you learn. But who will evaluate that, and with what criteria?
Doctors. I'm just kidding.
I think it's always complicated, right? So it's anybody, we're talking about a very hot topic, right? Cannabis and recreational, and what is this pilot program? Everybody's like looking at Switzerland as a potential legalization and maybe a great potential for other foreign corporations to come here and launch products and everything. And it's, I mean, Lino, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is really not the purpose here. And it will be very hard, I think, for any company to, import their products for this pilot program. And, even though it's broad, right? You can do flour, you can do oils, you can do edibles, you can do whatever they decide. So, maybe on that purpose of if it's still organic, but actually you're not getting the flower that you're smoking, but you're going to get a processed flower of an organic edible or something, maybe that will have a bit of a different substance. That's what I see in comparison. If you think of the black market, which is mainly flower to smoke, I think maybe other products or innovations could be of a huge benefit. But the evaluation part, it's going to be hard.
I would say that's one of the reasons why they made the study so broad in an aspect of products, to have or to deliver to the participants alternatives to flowers that they don't get in the black market, so that they stick with the studies. Let's say oils, edibles is something you can't get in a Swiss black market or not in a big scale, but this is something the studies will supply and therefore be beneficial to the participants, because these are also health risks minimizing products. On the evaluation, in my opinion, the study organizers have to report to the Federal Office for Public Health about the data they received, the results of their studies. They have to report all the time, and they also have to do reporting on the THC that they've been buying from producers, that they have been selling. They have to register every sale. And I mean, Mike can tell you more about this. We are already doing this THC reporting for our research projects. And you have to be able to tell at any point in time where you had the THC. On monitoring how all of these studies like play out, who abides to the rule, or participants selling their study cannabis on the black market, there the Federal Office for Public Health is like the highest authority, but they gave a lot of responsibility down to each and individual cantons, as it is usual in Switzerland in our federalist system, that in the end, each responsible person for a canton has to overview the study and to see if they comply with all the regulations and framework.
We have a lot of questions from the audience, so I'm going to ask my last question before going to the questions that we have here. And it is something that I've heard sometimes with the experiments in the Netherlands in particular, and also in Switzerland, that these experiments that will take years until they are evaluated, in the case of Switzerland, 5 plus 2 years eventually, could be a way of delaying the debate of full legalization, right? So politicians don't want to deal with debating full legalization, so they accept these limited experiments, and everyone has to shut up 5 years until we see the results of this. That is not the case in Switzerland, at least, right? There's also the chance of full legalization while the experiments are ongoing, right?
Sure, as I tried to show in my last slide, there is a lot of political development going on, and the pilot projects might, or the industry is afraid that it is a step in the right direction, but a very small step. I mean, in Canada, they're conducting pilot projects as well, but on a nationwide level with 38 million people by just opening it up. And I guess the results we are receiving here won't be incredibly different from what the Canadians have done years past, but still it's important to have these other political processes in motion, because it also shows that the population is ready for change, that the politicians are pushing for change, and this just gives a dynamic and also kind of a pressure to lawmakers to react. And therefore, I'm not even sure if the I'm pretty sure that the pilot projects are not going to run for 10 years without other legalization coming in place first.
Would be weird, right?
And I think it's also important, sorry, Alfredo, it's important to consider that we're surrounded by the European Union, and Switzerland can't just legalize like that. There is also a certain set of rules that we have to abide to. We're not completely part of it, but on this specific matter, we are quite a bit part of it. There has been a push 20 years ago in the direction we're going now, and I was clearly slammed, not just from within, but from outside around us. So I think this is a great moment to show how it could work. And then if all the different frameworks around us and inside allow, there is a door open for the next stage.
Got it. let's go to the questions that we have from the audience, of which there are a lot. And if we can keep the answers short, then better, so that we can reply to most of them. I see, for example, Lily Temperton, good to have you here, is asking about opportunities for international companies to participate, for example, through a joint venture or something. Is there a restriction on that? And maybe I can add, how do you see international companies participating in the pilot schemes?
Well, I think there is a window for.
I think it was a good question, Lily.
Yeah, it is because I think it's a question everybody wants to hear an answer to, right? Especially if you're hearing from abroad. I think you will be able to come into those pilot programs. There is a window for importation, providing you fall and you're able to basically show that your product is organic, is up to the standards. However, it has been put in the ordinance that there is a preference that all products should be produced in Switzerland. So
yeah, if I remember correctly, the regulation says that it can be imported only if there is no Swiss produced product, right? And then we have another issue here, which is international trade of non-medical cannabis, which could be justified as being for scientific purposes, but it would be weird because at the end of the day, it would be used for recreational purposes.
It is a scientific, no, it's a scientific study. It's not a recreational purpose. It is actually a scientific study, so it would count as scientifically.
Need to believe it, but yeah, the argument can be made.
In my opinion, the ordinance doesn't state anything on restrictions for companies from abroad to participate. With importing material, I see small chances because I guess there will be enough material sourced from Switzerland.
Yeah.
But participating for them is possible for sure.
Yeah, and that answers also David Togoni question about imports. Then we have Simon Talet asking about living soil organic methods and whether these could fall under the guidelines, and I guess he means the organic guidelines.
I think the organic guidelines are pretty straightforward. I think if you have soil, the soil has to be intact, so it's going to have to be a field or a tunnel or a greenhouse built on living soil.
And by the way, the organic regulations are no mystery. They can even be found in English language. So you can read it in English, German, probably also Italian. So if you, I mean, we can add the link at the end. I can do that, or maybe one of you can do it. Because yeah, anyone can read them and they are quite straightforward. They are not for cannabis. They are just the organic regulations in general, right? What about concentrates, asks Simon as well. Lino mentioned hash, etc. However, are groups like Pure allowed to produce this dab, crunch, etc. for these pilots through extraction? And I guess the answer is yes, right? This can be part of the experiment. It's actually encouraged, right?
So far, we are not allowed to produce such products, but in the framework of these pilot projects, if we get one of these special permits together with an organizer, yes, then we would have we would be allowed to produce such products for these pilot projects.
I think it's completely open. Right?
Do you see, for example, I mean, everyone knows that there are quite a few companies doing extraction in Switzerland of CBD for the CBD market. Do you see some of these companies using their infrastructure for the pilot experiment now with THC products?
I would hope so. No?
That's good, because you already have an infrastructure there in Switzerland. It's not like somebody needs to build a lab and buy the extraction machinery and everything. Some companies are already doing that at scale with CBD only now, but if they could join the experiment, then would make everything faster, right?
Yeah, and I think you'll find there's companies not only vertically integrated doing extraction and produce, but you'll also find there are also companies that are doing food manufacturing with CBD, and it could be a way for them to bring their brand or their product into these pilot projects.
I mean, we are still a young market in Switzerland, but extremely dynamic, innovative, and pretty well established compared to other countries in Europe, I'd say. Therefore, yes, we have a lot of infrastructures and a lot of companies already in Switzerland participating in the market.
Yeah.
I think
Jeff,
so sorry, Alfredo.
go ahead.
Just on like maybe for everybody to consider international companies that want to do a JV, I would look at, if you have specific delivery methods that that are not produced here in Switzerland, this could be a big opportunity to discuss with guys at Pure or other companies that will be involved in the production side. This could be an opportunity for at least consideration.
Totally agree.
Somebody is asking here about whether the pilot is looking to gain a clinical perspective. Would be challenging with no double-blind perspective. I mean, I guess this is not the purpose of the study. It's not about the medical efficacy of cannabis. It's about recreational, right?
Why not?
Luke, go ahead.
I would say, why not? Whatever you can put in there, and the more you can gain out of it. Again, I'll stress it again. It's a scientific study. So the more data you can take out of it, be that on the delivery methods, the bioavailability, be that on the production side, on the manufacturing side, be that on the complete circular economy aspect, be that on the social cultural aspects, be that on black-white market, be that on criminalization, youth protection, etc., etc. So that all belongs in there. And with that also, of course, if you can have certain clinical parts of it, I think it's highly encouraged.
Yeah, sorry, I was shaking. If I understood correctly, also on the ordinance, it does not cover any medical research, right? So it's pure recreational. And I think only when we were talking about the medical side, because obviously for a lot of patients in Switzerland, that it's quite expensive to receive medication, for cannabis medication. This could be an alternative to kind of not go to the black market. But from what I understood, it's definitely only recreational, and maybe potential patients that suffer from ADHD that wouldn't technically fall under medical cannabis. This could be an opportunity. But as far as I understand, it's not allowed to do any clinical research for diseases for that matter.
I have to rephrase. It's what I meant is nothing to do with actually clinical studies, but to have a closed circle on the scientific study of this, how it actually works. It's until the end consumer and the effects also on the public around. So not, of course, in any proper scientific, scientific, yes, but not medically scientific matters, right? Yeah. There's two aspects. There's social and there's medical.
It's a scientific.
And that was the question. Yeah.
Also, I mean, the doctors who have to monitor the patients are a costly part of the study, I'd say, and each study needs a responsible doctor to be available to all the participants. If you conduct clinical studies, this would come with more doctors and a lot of more costs. Therefore, even if the cities were allowed to, I doubt that they would go into medical studies.
We have 2 minutes left. I think we have to call Paul. I will, by the way, Paul, give me just 1 second. I will paste a link in the chat to the organic regulations that some people were asking.
Great, and I think also, Alfredo, on that point, I think on the LinkedIn event page, anybody can share information or reach us out if they want any discussions.
All right, great. Wow, that was content rich, not superficial at all, really a pretty substantive policy-based deep dive. Let me say this, a lot of the challenges or opportunities around cannabis for either investors or really for founders, entrepreneurs, is managing your emotions, because you're bombarded by often conflicting market signals. On the one hand, there's all this reason for incredible optimism and belief that the market, you're on the precipice of this explosive dynamic new market. And on the other hand, because of the counterparty issues around regulation, you got to often temper that enthusiasm with the reality on the ground, which is still going to go very slowly. And there's still a lot of caution from regulators. And we all can fully, I think, ideate where this is heading. But the challenge for companies, quite frankly, that are early stage, and I certainly have had my fair share of participation in early stage companies, is managing the capital obligations of the company that balances both the scale you're going to need to seize the opportunity when it's fully realized, but is balanced against the knowledge that today the so-called TAM, or total addressable market, if you will, is still uncertain. And so when you're building any infrastructure business, you're always sort of competing. You're building your demand channel, but you're also building your infrastructure. And you really don't want one to get too far ahead of the other, for obvious reasons that it threatens the long-term durability and stability of the company. And there's a lot to learn from Canada, because we've had these sort of operatic cycles. We're probably in our 5th era of, bulls versus bears sort of overall macro mentality around the industry. And that's knowing that we've had a medical cannabis program since the 1990s, but really a commercial program since 2013. So we're still, almost now a decade into our medical cultivation program and several years into our adult use program. We're still seeing a lot of, market asymmetries that need to be gapped in order to have a fully competitive industry. You're well behind, obviously, where we are in Canada and Switzerland, but you can learn. And for the executives, they should take measure that they are going to have to sort of dial back their expectations of what revenue might look like on their pro formas, because we just learned this all over the world. Costs more than we thought, takes longer than we thought, worth the effort though, if you can be there for the long term. So I think these sort of like contradictory signals are likely the standard across emerging cannabis jurisdictions, and that is both the opportunity and the challenge for not only operators, but for investors that want to participate. So I just say that what's going on here is so eerily reminiscent of what the dialogue was in other jurisdictions that are a few years down. And I think it's very predictable where this will go. It's going to get bigger and better. And the counterparty, i.e. the regulator, is going to get over whatever sort of retroactive or reductive concerns they have. And they're going to realize there's only wins by having a fully market-driven adult use cannabis program. Win for all constituencies that are affected. Win for the economy, win for good jobs, win for being able to provide patient safety, patient efficacy, consumer safety, consumer efficacy, better technology, better outcomes for everybody. And to the degree that there's a social justice impact in Europe, which no doubt there is, better outcomes on the social justice. So we're going to need the bright people on this call to stay the course and continue to build their incredible companies alongside some of the challenges that this unique asset class presents. So really, really cool. And at Global Go, obviously, we're tracking all of this and participating and continuing to increase our own knowledge base. I want to thank our sponsors today, because without the sponsors, I don't think we would have been able to have this format, some of which were represented on the panel today, Vigia and Pure Holding, but also MedCan, where again, I encourage everyone that is able, that enjoyed today's content, to make a donation to MedCan to help accelerate the pace of reform, to finally Andrew Petronis's company, which is in a JV with Global Go to provide services throughout Europe, tapping into our years of legacy experience in North America and combining it with Andrew's incredible go-to-market strategies in Europe, and to the law firm Zuber Lawler, always our perennial sponsor at Global Go. Thank you to our audience, most importantly, for taking time out of your busy schedules. And thank you to all of our content providers for really raising the bar yet again. Until next time, this is Paul Rosen from Global Go, wishing you well. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.